uh, to our part 2 of Elevating You, the Roadmap to Fulfilled and Impactful Career Masterclass series. We are thrilled to have you join us today for this exciting session covering capabilities and relationships. I'm again delighted to introduce our esteemed speaker, Diana Dragomirovic. Diana is the CEO of the Lead Icon and the Australian Medical Network. She is known for igniting sparks of innovation, catalysing collective action, and leading with an unwavering mission to create lasting impact in both business and society. At the Lead Icon, Diana helps businesses grow stronger and more resilient by unlocking new funding streams, driving sales and marketing growth, and strengthening organisational culture. In healthcare, Diana leads the Australian Medical Network, a national not-for-profit focused on making Australia the healthiest nation in the world. With a network of over 10,000 health professionals and consumers, AMN amplifies important conversation and advocates for policy change. Diana is also a proud Macquarie University alum, holding a Masters of Business Administration from 2017. I look forward to hearing from Diana today. But before we start, just a couple of housekeeping things. The workbook for today's session will be posted in the chat. And during the session, please add your questions to the Q&A function and we'll go through them at the end. This is our second session, obviously, and I got a lot out of part 1 and have already implemented some of her tips already. So please join me in welcoming Diana as she shares her valuable insights with us today. Over to you, Diana.
Well, good afternoon, Jim, and thank you for having me back again for part 2. And I first just want to thank you and Macquarie and the team for, hosting these masterclasses. They're so important, especially for, whether you're an established leader or an emerging leader. It just keeps us nimble and it gives us an opportunity to have conversations and to think, like, how can we do things differently? And I also want to thank everybody that attended last time. Your feedback has been wonderful. And for those of you who have connected with me on LinkedIn or even emailed me, I really am grateful for the reach out. And if you do have any questions, again, you're more than welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or reach out to me on my through email. So, Jim, may I share my screen?
Go for it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'll just share. Now, today is all about, I guess, leadership and relationships. And what I'd like us to focus on is, what does it mean to be a good leader? And what are how important are relationships? Because according to a few thought leaders out there, such as Ray Dalio, Nouriel Roubini, and a few others, they're quite concerned about our preparedness from a global level and also from from population levels in terms of how we're going to handle the next, say, decade. Because if you look at the cycles of history and what may lay ahead, we may be entering a period of a bit of reshuffling, and we're talking economically, societal, political, and the other aspects of what makes up our lives. Now, the benchmarks the problems that we're seeing are things like debt. We're seeing a lot of civil unrest around the world. We're also seeing that, there's so many disagreements. There's the left, the right, conservative, not conservative. But the one thing that we can all agree is that most people are not happy with the way that the world is going. And that leads us on to then leadership. And this is not an uncommon thing because, if you look in antiquity, there's always upheavals. And as I mentioned in part one, there are always going to be pivots in life, catastrophes, but it's up to us how we look at that situation and how we prepare for it. So many would say we have a leadership crisis today. And when we look at why, we're seeing both the public and private sector hesitant to make bold decisions. The public sector is scared to do it because they're afraid of losing votes. The private sector is scared to do it because they're afraid of being cancelled or the share price dropping. So we have an opportunity here today to focus on what does it mean and what do we need to do to enhance our own leadership. And so this doesn't matter whether you are an emerging leader or you're an established leader, or if you're somebody who, you don't have to have leadership in your job title to do this, because this also requires a whole lot of self-leadership from all of us. So let's just move forward to why leadership, and you have to forgive me, this bard keeps getting in the way of my presentation. So why leadership matters. So we just said we've got this global and local complexity, and many of the problems I face as a business owner is the lack of, I guess, policies around entrepreneurship and supporting in Australia. We rank pretty low when you look at the entrepreneurship scale in across the world. Our corporate side is pretty good. Like, we've got great sectors like energy and finance. But when it comes to building businesses from the ground up, it's quite challenging here. The other thing that leadership is important is this concept of rational thinking and understanding of the psychological mechanisms behind media-induced fear. So we get a lot of fear thrown at us as professionals, as people who work hard. And so we need to, as leaders, discern what is fear. So I did a map of all from about 1960 to today, about all the different elements that, all the media, I guess, pushed fear. So things such as, like, in the 60s, we had atomic anxiety. In the 1970s, we had oil crisis. In the 80s, it was nuclear. And now we've got AI being pushed at us as something to be afraid of. So I just want us to be mindful that where is this coming from, and how much of it can we actually, I guess, edit out and discern what is real, what isn't. Because even though those all were real at the time, they didn't actually play out. So, how do we actually, I guess, edit all that out? And the other thing with leadership is leaders build people, and they need to hold themselves to a higher standard. So today you're going to be asking yourselves things like, what are the skills and capabilities that you will need over the next, say, let's just use a very easy timeline, say 3 years. And also, I want you to think about this idea of what is in your backpack. Now, I heard this over the weekend, and I really want to share this with you because I was at this conference on the weekend, and you go to a lot of conferences, but this one was actually quite transformative. And one of the speakers, and the conference was about classical education, because I have a few clients in the education space. And classical education is having a resurgence, and they had a couple of US speakers out. And one of the things that they talked about in the backpack is that as we are forming and growing as young children into adults, we carry this backpack, and in this backpack, we have all the beliefs and ideals and instructions that have been handed down to us from our parents, our guardians, our education system, teachers, peers, the people we work with. And then there comes a time where, when do we actually take off the backpack, look into it, inside it, and decide what is relevant to us and what we actually believe in? And that really struck me because I've never actually been taught that. And I know my peers that were there, they also hadn't. Like, you do it sort of inadvertently, you do it, but to think of it that intentionally, I really loved that whole metaphor of a backpack. So I invite you to review what's in your backpack. So when you finish today, think about what have you been trained to think, and is it actually serving you? And what does it mean to be a good leader? That's the things I want you to really be thinking about as we go through this presentation. Now, I want to position the word good because good often is seen as boring, but I want you to think of good as something that is actually principled and has a standard and can also be inspiring, because we always hear about great leadership, great high performing teams. But when you look at great leaders, we're talking about like 0.001% of people, like people who have changed the course of history. You know, we're talking Abraham Lincoln, you know, Napoleon, for good or bad, you know, but these are the types of people that you look at as great leaders. Maybe, you know, depending on your position on great. Good leaders are those who actually create, you know, good organizations, good communities. You know, sometimes the unsung heroes that you don't even hear about, but they're really effective. So I'd like you to think of that. And that's where the majority of us fall in. We can be good because being great requires a whole heap of, you know, different, you know, elements to occur in your life, you know, to happen. I'm not saying that none of us might end up being great leaders, but I'm just saying it's okay to be a really good leader too. So the next thing I'd like us to think about is, what do good leaders rely on? Now, these words make up what makes a good leader. Now, I also want to decipher between skill and capability, because you hear these two words thrown around all the time. So I'll just give you the actual, like in a lived experience, what they are. So skill is that you're really good at leading a team in a meeting. So you can create the meeting, you lead the team, you start it, you finish it. That's a good skill. Now, capability is where you're actually able to take that team and lead them through uncertainty, lead them through conflict, and lead them through the different requirements that are needed for each individual person. That's a capability. So if we look at these words that are on this screen, you know, we have about 15 areas. There are a lot more, but these are the core areas that are really important for today. So take a screenshot of that so that you can also think about what that is. I'm not going to be going through all of them because there's no time for that, but the ones that I will go through are the ones I just felt are most important at this point. So, for example, let's just start with the first one. So decision making. This is the one I see that leaders really have a problem dealing with, decision making, because the bigger the organization gets, the harder it is to actually get decisions made, because you've got hierarchy for obvious reasons. And then in smaller businesses, decisions can be sat on for a very long time because of fear that the wrong decision will be made. So the areas that I find are quite that stop us are stress or pressure, imperfect information. Like, a lot of people need the 90% of the information to be able to make a decision. And then we've also got perfectionism and uncertainty. These all cause a lot of, pain for us. So then good leaders act decisively even under uncertainty. And that's because they have the right team around them to help them make the right decision. And then at the end they can say, no, we're going with that, or we'll take, X's approach. So they analyze and rehearse scenarios. So one of the things that I do a lot with my team is we will scope out best, worst, and what we can live with scenarios when we're deciding on. And I'm often dealing with time, like, 5-10 year timelines, because a lot of our work is about looking at what's ahead and what can, affect us today. Now, the other thing that I want you to bear in mind is this Latin term called festina lente. Now, we live in a world where everything fast is rewarded, but when you look at fast, it doesn't always correspond to success. And I'll give you an example. So I know Salesforce has been developing a software for the federal government, and this software is I think it's in the area of the AI framework. Now, what happened is that the budget has blown out in terms of their building this framework. Now, because of the uncertainty around AI, there's all these decisions being made. But if we just took a balance between urgency and diligence, we would find that we would come to the right decision. There's a great book out by that Pixar, the film company, created, and it's a creativity book. And it basically talks about that you can't rush creativity. It doesn't mean that we sit on it. We sit on decisions, but sometimes we need to really excavate all the possible answers to get to the right one. Like I had that on the weekend where we were coming up with a slogan, and we were arguing about it, not in in a mean way, but we were arguing it and dissecting it. And in the end, we probably got about 80%. But had we not given ourselves the space to actually and the freedom to argue it, we would not even gotten to that point. So the other thing is high performers. Now, forgive me, that should be good performance, because I want to move away from this high and, that, because that's also, I guess, a fallacy in some case. Like high performing can be, there are certain teams that do work at that high level, but good is really good too. So high performers do simulate scenarios to stay ahead. So we've got to learn the art of chess. So think to yourself, when did I freeze instead of deciding, and what would I do differently now? The other area from that list is learning from feedback and friction. We do not like feedback because we're afraid that we're not doing something right. And one of our biggest fears as humans is criticism. And I invite you to enjoy feedback, and whatever you need to do in terms of a course or read a book, do it, because feedback is your best way to get better. And when somebody criticizes you, do not be afraid to say something like, thank you. Just thank them, even if it's something that offends you. I mean, obviously, if it's something that is hurtful to you or unsafe to you, that's a different conversation. But I'm talking about the general criticisms that we get. So, for example, I was criticized recently over a document that we produced, and the founder that I worked with, he wanted a different angle. I thanked him for it, because had he not shared his criticism, I would have not known which direction to take this strategy. So do not be afraid to question yourself, what worked, what didn't, and who can guide me. I also invite you not to be self-doubting all the time. Like if you come up with something that is a good idea, don't be afraid to explore it. Now, engagement, really important as a leader, because if you don't learn how to engage people, you're not going to get the best out of them. So just a few things I want you to remember, and this is something that was really interesting to me when I learned it. You actually cannot make anyone do anything, and we cannot actually motivate anybody. What we can do is find out what drives them and then help them motivate themselves. And I spend a lot of time with people trying to figure out what motivates them. And when I do find and they half the time don't know what motivates them. And more times than not, they're not motivated by money. Most people are motivated by respect, by feeling heard, by feeling important, and by being involved. And I don't see, I'd like to see more of this in our businesses and in our companies. So you can actually start that. The other really important one is modeling desired behaviors. When you look at, leaders around you or even yourself, if we're not modeling what we want others to do, how can we expect them to follow us? Or how can we expect someone to promote us? Or how can we expect anyone to listen to us? So model desired behaviors and observe. Spend a lot of time observing people. Be curious as to what people want out of what they want and where they're going. So this is the next one, lead by questions. I find that often we are so busy trying to get our point across that we forget to ask questions. And I'll give you an example. I was at an event and I was speaking to somebody who was in the area of energy. Now, I don't do a lot of work in this area, but I have an idea. So the questions I was asking that person was around, the future of their company, their innovation, and all that sort of thing. Later on, the person who was holding the event came up to me and said that this guy that I was speaking to was so impressed with my knowledge in energy that, and I hooked away thinking, but I didn't actually say anything. It was because the questions I asked. So do not be afraid to ask questions and encourage inquiry. We're afraid to ask what people think and to excavate, as I said, and we're afraid to celebrate. So if you can engage people, that would be great, because then you'll find that people will come along the ride with you. So think about how are you encouraging others to act from their own initiative, or are you relying on rules and pressure to drive action? Now, you may be looking at the leaders that you might be on the other end, where are they doing this to you? So don't be afraid to have these conversations with them, because most people, as Jim and I were speaking about before we came on to the masterclass, most people go to work wanting to have a great day. They don't go to work wanting to make anyone's day miserable. But we do go to work with fears and with expectations, and things don't work, and we're all bringing in our emotional and physical and all sorts of problems with us. So we need to stop and observe. So if you can start doing that, you may feel that will catch on and you can teach other people. So the next one is digital dexterity, data analysis, and lived experience. Now, we can't get away from technology. Technology is very important. The whole thing around AI and analytics and all that sort of thing is really, how can I say, making life easier for us. But something that I've discovered is that in working with many businesses, is that they will invest so much money in technology, but it's actually not translating into value or higher revenue or sales. The amount of software and data that people are dealing with, we're not utilizing it to its best, to the best capability. So one of the things that I recommend is have a cool head about this and think about what is it that you're using and how effective is it actually making your job. So, for example, I don't know what tools you use, because we're obviously not in a forum where we can exchange, but maybe in the quick Q&A we can. But be very discerning on what tools you use. And if you see that it's wasting money for your firm, say something. Say something, because every firm is actually bleeding money in this area. Now, the other thing that I think is really important to think about is the lived experience. As much as data and technologies is important, our experience really says a lot about what will work and what doesn't work in the future. And I really recommend that you examine history. Look at all the historical players in management, in leadership, even in military exercises, what worked for them, because that will then help you make decisions. Because remember, using digital, using data is all about how do we make our jobs easier? How do we become more productive? And how can we eliminate all those redundant jobs like your admin? And not that they're redundant, admin is very important, but how do we stop focusing on the areas that take up a lot of our time and start focusing and being able to, work in the areas that really drive us and excite us? And the other thing that I notice is learn to write well. I know that a lot of people find writing very hard. If you can do a short course in writing, it will really improve your chances of, not only promotion, but, if you're, filling out a grant application, you're pitching to a VC, learning how to write and how to think succinctly is a really important skill. And do not hand that over to technology. You have to be in control of that. So which tools could transform your outcomes? Think about that, and not just the tech side, but also the old-fashioned writing and thinking side. Now, resilience and cognitive flexibility, mental health is a problem. There's billions of dollars is being poured in by federal and state governments into helping people in the workplace, especially with mental health issues. So how can you be more resilient? How can you bounce back where if something was to happen, what would you need to help you adapt under that pressure? What do you need? And think about who do you need to speak to regarding that? So one of the things that, we do is we build mental rehearsal routines. So we will rehearse something over and over and over and over again. And we actually got that from the army also, because if you look at when an army is training, they will rehearse to tedium the same, I guess, the same practice run, they will rehearse it and rehearse it, and then they rely on each other's team members, and everybody knows what everybody's doing. It's such a well thought out system. So I even encourage that, because once you've rehearsed something, it doesn't feel so challenging. And also, I love this saying, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. So anytime something is said to you that you may not like, you don't need to always take it on. You be like our dude here, this lizard, just poker face. You don't need to take everything on. You don't need to be offended over everything. It's something that takes a bit of time to learn, but if you put your body and heart into it, it's something that you can really teach yourself to. I'm not saying to be unhuman, I'm saying we don't need to worry about everything that's said to us, every comment, every criticism. It's not something that we need to carry with us all the time. So think, do I respond rigidly or with flexibility? Now, influence, very important. Good leaders understand their audience. And again, if you are not somebody with a leadership title, do not worry, because it's the same thing. You are leading up. There are 3 ways of leading. You're leading either across, up, or down. So it doesn't matter which way it is. All of these work for every single person. So when I say understanding your audience, I mean know who you're speaking to. So if you're speaking to a boss, you need to be clear and succinct and tell them what impact. If you have a problem, you also give them a few solutions, making their life easy. If you're leading downwards, you're about engagement. If you're leading across, it's about collaboration, because your peers will see you, if you like, and I've noticed this in my historical corporate life, if I came across too strong, they'd get backs up. So you think, collaborate, what are your strengths, what are my strengths? So leadership impact depends on relationships and persuasion. And even if it's outside your authority, you've got to think of yourself as influential. And we covered that last week. So I hope everybody went out and bought Robert's book, the Persuasion book. So I also want to challenge something about leadership, because one of the things that I explore a lot, because I deal with leadership so much, is this concept of power. We talked about power last time. Today, I want to introduce the concept of hospitality. Power is important because we do live in a world where we have to get things done. We have to, we have to work with people to get things done. But there's a difference between, command to get obedience to get stuff done versus hospitality. So if you learn I guess the art of hospitality, it builds loyalty, trust, and lasting impact. It's not about being nice or a carpet so people walk all over you. It's about serving. It's about getting the best out of people. Because remember, leaders are typically, the difference between leadership and management is leaders have followers and leaders build people, whereas managers build systems and processes and they get tasks done. So leadership is especially important when it comes to hospitality. If you want people to do stuff, you've got to help them, I guess, improve on themselves, show interest in them. And this is something that if you're in that position and you need somebody to do that, that's where you need to find a mentor to help bring that out in you. We can't do it all on our own. Humans are, we are all relational. We need each other to get ahead. And there's a great poem, if I have time at the end, I want to read to you, because it's all about that we're in this all together, and all our, I guess, our steps, our actions affects each other. So think about where you need to influence to achieve impact, and where do you begin? So, and the last one is the learning, agility, and growth mindset. Now, the biggest thing I want you to think about here is, where are your skills gaps? Remember, we talked about your skills gaps being, okay, what's the task that you're good at? But what do you really need to develop, and how can you experiment? There are so many short courses out there, like Udemy. Like, you can literally do a course in 3 hours that can at least give you plant a seed. I really recommend doing that, including that in your learning, on a weekly basis. Like, learn something, like pick an area that you want to develop and just really learn it out. The other thing that I really recommend you learn is logic and rhetoric. Now, why do I say that? If you want to climb the ladder, whether it be in an organization or start your own business, if you don't know how to persuade people and think logically and know how to speak, it just means that you won't be seen as, I guess, as effective as, say, the others do. I look at, for example, in the States, it just seems that everybody can speak really well over there. And I'd love to see that like that here in Australia. Like, I noticed that in our universities, for example, we do get up a lot to speak and to, present our ideas. But what we don't get taught is this element of rhetoric and logic, unless you actually seek them out. So go and do the courses on that. You'll really stand apart from other people. So am I learning for tomorrow or relying on yesterday's skills? Become a value creator. Don't just focus on your low tasks. You've got opportunity to really build out what impact you have. What is it that you want to achieve in terms of just your professional career we're talking about here? Because you're a whole person. There's more to you than just your career, but I'm just using this in the context of your career. I'd like you also to identify the top 3 experiences where your effort leads to has led to the desired outcome. Have that front of mind, because often we forget to celebrate our wins. Remember those things that you really did well, because they're important, because we need to build up our self-confidence and think of ourselves as we're moving forward, we're progressing. Now, I've developed a leadership matrix, which I think that you'll love, because it's all about this whole idea of leadership not just being a mastering, and checklist, ticking checklist. It's about evolving over certain dimensions and how you're forming as a leader, the formation of a leader. Because who you are now and the type of, what you achieve over the course of your life, think about how do you want to be perceived, not just now or when you're 20, 30, 40, 50, but also when you're 80. What is it that you're leaving? Who is it that you're becoming as a leader, let's say? So there are 6 different, I guess, types of leaders in an organization. You have the operational leader, which is about rallying the team and keeping the engine running at full speed. And that's all about staying cool, even when the heat is on. They're also about leveling up with the big picture systems thinking. Then we've got the people leader. They're shaping the culture, the people, how they thrive. And then we've got the strategic leaders. They're charting the course, looking at the horizon, taking the bold steps. So where do you see yourself right now? There's 3 more, so I'll show you what they are. Then you've got the change leader. You're sparking transformation. You're trying to move from here to there and bringing people along. Then you've got the connector external leader. They're really about winning the hearts and minds of investors and stakeholders. And then we've got the big cheese that I call about. They're generally the people in the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO. And they carry the whole organization and try to shape, its long-term viability. So again, where do you see yourself here? The next bit I want you to think about is there's these 5 dimensions of leadership, and think about it in the context of your organization. Where do you sit and where do the leaders that you work with sit? So we've got 5 archetypes. We've got the guardian, the operator, the visionary, the strategist, and the influencer. Now, if we start with the visionary and the operator, visionaries always see possibilities. You see them, like, for example, Richard Branson's a visionary. They see what other people don't see. The challenge with visionaries is that they can drift into abstraction. They can also, neglect execution, and they chase many shiny objects. So what they need is an operator to ground them. So the operator and the strategist to prove viability in terms of the what's feasible or not. The operator executes consistently. They run, steer the ship. They're making sure that no icebergs get hit. They make sure that everybody's doing, each department is feeding in and working, working together really well. So they master systems and reliability. However, they can be rigid, they can be transactional, and they can be slow to change. But they need the visionaries to keep their energy alive because they can be too serious, and they need the strategists to ensure that their efforts equal results. Now, the next group are strategist and influencer. So the strategist looks at the big picture, scans the horizon, then drills down into what are we focusing on? What strategic priorities are we focusing on? And how do we best deploy our resources so that we can achieve these? And then we've got, they often need the operator to help them push things forward, because strategists can get into, what do they call it? Analysis paralysis, so they can, tend to really drill down into things before, to everybody, yawning about it. And a lot of people don't understand strategists because they really go into their space of, I guess, buzzwords, and, they're great, but they need to be, helped along. And influencers, strategists need influencers to bring others along. That's, again, that engagement piece. Now, the influencers, they build coalitions, they shape culture, they persuade others. They're like the muse of the organization. But their problem is they can be a bit too charming, they can be manipulative, and they can avoid difficult truths. So that's where they need the guardians for ethical grounding, and operators so that they have substance, their substance equals style. The next one is the guardian and the legacy leaders. Now they're really important also. So guardians protect values, they ensure growth, they're ethical, but they resist innovation. They can resist innovation, and they don't like big, bold moves because they want things to be, how can I say, just followed properly. This is how we do things. They're very, very much about rules. They need the visionaries to push forward and the strategists to adapt. And the legacy leaders are your top level, like your chairmans and your CEOs who embed principles into the day-to-day, and they want to create lasting impact, and they develop the successes. So they balance all the 5 archetypes. They think in decades. And the problem with them is that if too many opportunities are missed, then the organization doesn't flourish as well. So think about, are you thinking beyond today? And which archetype could you perhaps, layer into your leadership practice? Or if you've never thought of it, which one would you like to start with? Now, I wanted to, there was one more here that I wanted to go through with you. Where is it now? Sorry, you'll have to forgive me. Yes, sorry, I've forgotten that it's later on the track. So just a reflection piece, just to end this bit. I want you to think about this week. If anything that you do this week, I'd like you to set aside 15 minutes. And in that 15 minutes, I'd like you to pick somebody or read or enroll in some short course. Something where you can enhance your leadership or self-leadership. Having a brave conversation. Pick something that gets you moving, because if you're here, it means that a lot of the things that you're looking at are, how do you extend yourself? How do you build on your leadership? So that's something I'd like you to think about over the next week. Now, relationships. Relationships are really important, and they are things that we need in terms of our relationships with the people that we work with. It's everything. Without relationships, we can't get businesses off the ground. We can't basically get people to help us to move businesses forward. So why do they matter? As we know, it's not just about skills or tasks. It's again about influence. So in your early career, really build on your relationships and building your network. And if you're afraid to do it, that's where you need a mentor to help you move forward with it, to be able to make those, I guess, first steps to talk to people, to find out how you can extend yourself. Because your work should be inspiring to you. It shouldn't be something that you dread going to. Not every day is about skipping to work, but as long as your work is satisfying and fulfilling, that's a great start. So now, leadership in action. As I said, management ensures work gets done, and leadership ensures people grow. Now, looking at your relationship building, look at 20% of your week needs to be allocated to relationship building. Like, who do you reach out to? Now, that could be a mentor, it could be reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, it could be attending a conference, a seminar. Like, think about, where do you spend more time, tasks or people? Where do you do that? Where do you spend most of your time? Next, we have the influence beyond your title. So you can lead across, which is to your peers and collaborate with, when it comes to your shared wins, or you can lead up. So that's where you've got to create the trust, the clarity, the proactive solutions. And then leading down is what they are reporting back to you and modeling desired behaviors. So map out 2 to 3 key stakeholders outside your direct control and figure out what you need, what is it that you would like to influence with them? What would you like to see change? And start small. We touched on that in part 1. Now, here's a practical example that I'd like to review with you. So Jacqueline Novogratz, she's the founder and CEO of Acumen. Now, Acumen is a not-for-profit investment fund, and she does a lot of work in, around the space of poverty. And like, if you can see the figures, like she's spent 135 million to build 136 social enterprises across Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. And she's impacted, hundreds of millions of people. And her leadership is characterized by moral imagination, a focus on others, and a commitment to addressing poverty. So where do you see your leadership going? Because when the leaderships that we discussed, moments ago, there's more to you than just, a structure around, a textbook style, leadership style. What type of leader do you want to become? Or what type of leader are you becoming? So how can you frame your work to resonate with others' priorities? That's the key around here. Then we've got the currency of influence. I know I talk a lot about influence, but that is something that you really need to get your head around, and really working on trust. So when you look at the framework of negotiation, the first line is you learn about, you build relationships. And in building relationships, you build trust, because trust is what will have people come back to you, will have people think of you, will have people refer to you, will have people promote you. So think about how you're building that, your currency of influence. And where could you build more trust this week? You started. Like, we often think about, well, they're not doing it, but where do we do it? Where, if we're waiting for other people to do things, well, where would this world end up? We need to take responsibility. And if we're not happy about something, the first step starts with us. So next leader that I admire is Hamdi Ulukaya. He started the yogurt brand Chobani, and he's really interesting because he moved over to the States and built Chobani on a really different model, where he went to a town in the States that had the largest dairy factory, and the business that was there prior had basically, and this dairy factory basically employed most of the community. So when they stopped operating, people were out of their jobs. So Hamdi went in and rehired all these people and started a yogurt factory. He also brought in refugees, and he created a culture of self-responsibility, which I think these stories around these businesses that have, I guess, like that impact are really nice. Design to work for a not-for-profit is a great thing. It's just that there are so many, but there are for-profits that also have these nice models. With respects to the glue that holds trust together, it all comes to how we present and hold ourselves, our self-awareness, our self-management, our social awareness, the way we manage relationships, and practice self-reflection and empathy daily. So, for example, I don't know how many of you, but at the end of the day, reflect on your day. What did I do well? What didn't I do well? What can I do better tomorrow? Do not be afraid to ask to be better for yourself, because if you're better, your relationships are better. You decide what your life looks like. So, I encourage you to read a lot about this, this EQ, because it really is a game changer when you start to discern your own behavior. I'll just flick through this slide. It's not important. Now, conflict. Conflict is really part of every day, whether at home, at work, we are always getting in some type of conflict. And it normally starts with how people speak to each other, someone rejects your idea. So before you allow your blood pressure to go up, always pause before reacting. We've got 2 ears, 1 mouth. Take some time to listen, and when you do say something, come across like intentionally. So name the issue, not the person. Seek to understand first. Ask questions. If somebody says something that you're not sure about, ask a question. And then prepare, focus on behavior and maintain your dignity. Even if somebody offends you, maintain your dignity. Don't go up. Like if somebody goes up, don't follow them. Stay that way because they'll come down to you. So isn't that a huge number? 85% of employees face workplace conflict. If you take the step to handle conflict, people will follow your example. Remember, model desired behaviors. It's not easy, but it's possible. It's possible. And we don't always have to react to people. We can stop back and not say anything. So what's one conversation you've been avoiding? How could you approach it differently? Constructive conflict in action. So, for example, say a director delivers a performance feedback to a disruptive team member. I would always highlight behavior, align with goals, and offer support. That way you can always maintain trust. So whoever you are, and say, for example, if you're delivering it, you can follow that framework. But if you're being asked this, if the constructive criticism, if the criticism is being delivered to you, then you just go in with questions and ask what's expected of me, or could you explain more of that to me, rather than getting upset. We show on our face. It's different if it comes down again, situationally, who is delivering it and how they're delivering it. Again, we've got an hour, so there's only so much that we can cover. So leadership through connection. So balance management and people, lead across up and down, and grow your EQ. Now, lasting influence, again, the technical side of your work is important, but it's also the four intelligence that we talked about, the EQ, the social, the adversity. They're really important to get a hold of and to keep learning. So I think with a lot of the changes that are occurring in the world, if you start to think about yourself more as an ambassador, not as somebody who just needs to, just deal with the day to day and let it go by, be more intentional about your work and where you want to go. You'll find that not only will you be able to manage up or across or down, you'll actually find doors opening that you never even expected. So if you want to find out more about, these concepts, feel free to reach out to me. I know I've rushed through a lot, but I really want you to walk away with just one point, and that is, what type of leader do you want to become? Not just now, but over the course of your life. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Gianna. We have a time for a couple of questions. So if anyone has any questions, please pop them into the chat quickly before we wrap up today's session.
I noticed there are two questions. Oh, that's you. You're okay.
We must have done a great job, Gianna, of
There's no
explaining everything.
questions. Yeah, it's a tough area, leadership, especially when you're dealing with, especially if you're starting or middle management, they're not easy areas. Would you agree, Jim?
Exactly right. And especially in university sectors, there's a lot in the news about leadership of universities and how that is working. So that's a really topical issue for us in this sector. But it doesn't really matter what sector you're in. Leadership is always either something that you have to deal with or being forced upon you. So yeah, I guess there's no questions. So I guess we can wrap up today's session. But as I said, thank you, Gianna, so much for presenting and providing your great insights and giving back to the alumni community. It's so great to work here and have such a community who's willing to share their expertise back with us. And as I said, I've already used some of your tips from last session, and I especially love your tips, especially about the trust that you just shared and how you build that. And those real world examples is really valuable for what we do in my role here at Macquarie. And I hope everyone else is looking forward to applying your insights from this session and from session 1 as well. And that brings me nicely to wrapping things up. We'll send all the recordings from both sessions, plus all the worksheets and stuff, to everyone who registered for both events, and you'll have those so you can go back to at any time. We'll also send out a survey because, as Diana mentioned, we can't improve if we don't know what we need to improve and what your thoughts are. And alumni feedback is really valuable. We've just had an example where alumni feedback has directly contributed to changing a Macquarie policy here, which is great. So don't underestimate the power of that. And I'm also very excited to announce that our next alumni event, our major alumni event, is Leadership Level Up on the 21st of October. So please watch out for that invite in the coming weeks. And lastly, I would like to extend a big heartfelt thank you for all of you for joining us over the last couple of sessions. It's a pleasure to put them on for you and have our alumni come back and give their expertise as well. So thank you to joining us. Thank you, Diana. And if you have any questions, I'll let either Diana or myself know. Thank you so much, guys.